John here once again with Gears of War 4, and we wanted to take this opportunity to share some performance results and thoughts on the game's multiplayer and Horde mode. We'll have a full analysis of the game coming up soon, but for now, let's jump into the multiplayer. Starting with the basics then, on Xbox One, Gears of War 4 targets 1080p across all modes, with an adaptive resolution feature designed to maintain high performance in challenging scenarios. Thanks to Unreal Engine's high-quality temporal anti-aliasing feature, the image quality on display here is among the cleanest we've seen on Xbox One. Between this game and Forza Horizon 3, it's clear that the internal development teams have poured a lot of effort into achieving great image quality on Xbox One. Then, as we've seen in many other recent games, Gears of War 4 goes for a split frame rate model, with the competitive multiplayer targeting 60 frames per second, while the rest of the package, such as Horde Mode 3.0, aims for 30 FPS instead. Now, we've actually played Gears 4 in multiplayer before months ago when it was launched in beta form, and we're pretty disappointed by the visuals on display, but we also realized that it was a genuine beta test rather than just a glorified demo. But, as I predicted in that video, you may want to bookmark this video right now for later just to see how the final game stacks up. I bet it'll be smoother. The final game does indeed look and run dramatically better. All of the levels have been heavily polished up from what we saw in the beta version, with greatly increased geometric and texture detail, along with much more dramatic lighting and improved image quality all around. This is a marvelous upgrade, and the game does look great in its multiplayer mode now. What's also interesting is that the maps appear identical between the 60 FPS competitive mode and the 30 FPS Horde mode, suggesting that the difference in performance targets is entirely due to the addition of AI creatures and potentially larger battles, just as we'd expect. But the real question here then is one of performance. So starting with the competitive mode, just how well does the game actually maintain its 60 frames per second target? Based on my experience with the game thus far, performance has been excellent. I captured more than 1 hour of multiplayer footage and kept my eyes open for any moments when the frame rate buckled, and thankfully, I only ran into a few instances. When the frame rate drops, it basically looks like this. We see a few torn frames along the top of the image, thanks to the adaptive V-Sync, but the frame rate generally remains pretty high, even under load. But here's some of the examples where I ran into issues. The most significant performance problems actually occurred here on Gridlock, which is a remake once again of this original map. In this scene, while moving towards the center of the map for instance, the frame rate starts buckling slightly, but controller response thankfully remains relatively crisp here and the issues clear up rather quickly. Then later on during the match we encountered this section which suffered from drops right here, and then moments later, it happens again. This time it seems to be caused by this electrical effect here, but once it disappears, everything's back to normal. Still, the overwhelming majority of the experience is more like this. A smooth, steady 60 frames per second. Of all the footage that I captured in multiplayer, only a very small percentage actually exhibited any tearing or slowdown at all, which is really a significant boost from the 55 frames per second average we found across a run of play in the older beta test version. The fact that we've seen both a boost to the visual quality in addition to a boost in performance is really excellent news for everyone. Now of course, since we're in the pre-release phase, we were only able to take part in a handful of matches, but we'll continue playing and testing the game as more people come online. It should be noted, however, that we were playing on a full server throughout all of these tests, so it should be pretty representative of what you will see on day one. Of course, this level of performance is made possible by the aforementioned adaptive resolution technology, which dynamically adjusts the horizontal scaling based on load. This allows you to enjoy the benefits of native 1080p in many areas, while sacrificing resolution when the action heats up, as opposed to simply locking the game down at a lower resolution. So while image quality can appear somewhat softer at times while playing in competitive mode, the excellent temporal anti-aliasing keeps the image from breaking up. So how about Horde mode then? Well, I wasn't actually able to find anyone playing this throughout my testing, but you can play by yourself against hordes of enemies. Based on our initial tests then, you can expect a rock solid 30 frames per second that never wavers. Throughout our entire experience in this mode, the game maintained its target frame rate. which perhaps shouldn't be a surprise, but it is nice to know. With the frame rate capped at 30 FPS in this mode, the game also maintains full 1080p throughout most of the experience on both a regular Xbox One and the Xbox One S. And thinking of the Xbox One S, I have to mention the support for high dynamic range. Now, the footage we've been showing here thus far has been captured on the original Xbox One in standard dynamic range, but I've also sampled these multiplayer modes in HDR mode, and the results are quite good. While it may not appear as dramatic as filmed HDR content just yet, I do feel that the extremely bright highlights contrasted against darker regions helps create a very atmospheric looking game. On this map, for instance, the brilliant sky, the specular highlights along the ground, and the gushing water all look incredible here. In real life, walking along a water-soaked street in bright sunlight may actually lead you to squint your eyes as you attempt to adjust to the brightness of the reflections, and you actually get kind of a similar effect here, though thankfully it's not bright to the point where you can't see, of course, so it doesn't actually impact the gameplay. But the end result is still a lot more natural and realistic than what you see in standard dynamic range mode. But thus far we've been talking about the Xbox One version, but how about that PC port then? Well, we'll have a lot more to say about this on our full analysis, where I'm planning to do a full settings breakdown with loads of comparisons, but for now my first impressions suggest that this is the single best Universal Windows platform release to date, and actually one of the better PC ports in general from recent years. You're given a remarkable amount of control over the game's visuals, and every setting offers the players an idea of how it will impact their system. But what really stands out about this port is the performance. Gears of War 4 runs like a dream, well, at least on our test PCs here. Thus far we've tested the GTX 970 and the 980 Ti, and both managed to hit 60 frames per second fairly easily using the Ultra preset. Of course, on the 970 this meant using 1080p resolution, but on the 980 Ti we could bump that up to 1440p, and it did quite well. Of course, it is actually possible to push details beyond the Ultra preset, with certain settings offering an option called Insane, but we'll look at that in the comparison video. It is, however, nice to see forward-looking options in a PC game these days. Just don't expect to be able to push these settings all the way up to Insane and still get perfect frame rates. The game also supports unlocked frame rates and offers the ability to disable vertical sync. It's even possible to enable the same dynamic resolution scaling option available on Xbox One, meaning you could potentially run the game at 4K with adaptive scaling, lowering the resolution based on load, and it actually does work quite well based on our testing. It should be noted, by the way, that our test CPU in this case was an Intel i7-5820K coupled with 16GB of memory, but most of the bottlenecking seemed to happen around the GPU. So at this point then, while the Windows Store itself is still a problem for many users, the quality of the port itself is extremely high and a far cry from the release of Gears of War Ultimate Edition earlier this year. Clearly, the team has poured a ton of effort into optimization on the PC, and it works very well. But we'll have a lot more to say on the PC version coming up soon, so stay tuned. But for now, I actually think that covers most of the basics in multiplayer right now. Essentially, Xbox One users can expect a very stable 60 frames per second in the competitive mode, while 30 FPS is maintained in Horde mode. Windows 10 users then have finally received a port truly worthy of their platform. But that's all for now. If you enjoyed this initial look at the game, be sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, this is John signing off.